A pleasure to meet all at last, and today we are now at our final quarter for 2024. We're discussing the months of October, November, and December, basically going into a good amount of details on what had happened during that time, and most importantly, how we ended the entirety of the year itself. Well, first off, I will say that the negative that truly defined 2024 in my life would have to be when I endured thyroiditis, thyroid inflammation. That was a thing that plagued me throughout a good majority of the year, but thankfully, of course, it was fully cured, thanks to the practices that were made possible by FitTuber, a man whom, of course, had made a video about how to properly cure all thyroid problems permanently. I, of course, had left a video link in the description box down below, so that way you guys can check out the video for yourself, and most importantly, understand what he went through and everything that, if done correctly, could potentially save you from thyroid problems, just as it had done for myself. But let's just say that the problems of 2024 just weren't exactly finished with me yet. I feel like that politics were a big part of 2024 just as well. And that's something I won't exactly go into detail of, but it just as much was a frustration. Constant bombardment of advertisements, lawn ornaments, and signs saying who to vote for, and all that ridiculousness itself. I mean, do you really want another civil war on your country? Like, way to go for creating two different sides. It might as well be Autobots and Decepticons. Speaking of which, I'd say that fall of 2024 has to be the point in which that there were a lot of amazing movies. I mean, at that time in particular, we had Transformers 1, which itself was a pretty damn big movie itself. And if I had to mention a few other big blockbusters, well, there was Despicable Me 4, A Quiet Place Begins, which of course is the prequel to the Quiet Place films. There also was The Wild Robot, Godzilla vs. Kong, The New Empire, as well as Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. And there was also the not-so-good Madam Web, which won 3 Golden Raspberries, and was a movie that I actually talked about not too long ago. So, while there were definitely lots of movies that I've watched, there was also the introduction of Gaming with Kaiju Force Neo, The First Impressions. The first few games that I had played were Monster Jam Showdown, Astrobot, Disney's Epic Mickey Rebrushed, as well as Starship Troopers Extermination. But basically speaking, there wasn't a whole lot that we did throughout most of the rest of the year. There was Lego Horizon Adventures, which also was a pretty big game for 2024 that I would highly recommend to anybody out there. But apart from that, with the majority of new games as well as a bunch of old games that I've either revisited or have tried for the first time, I'm pretty confident in saying that there were a lot of big games that I have played, a ton in general, that I have gone ahead and visited for the first time, in addition to revisiting. So, let's get on back to the problems at hand though, shall we? The politics and the thyroiditis were the unfortunate appetizers for probably another really big problem at hand. You see, remember my old car, a Nissan Juke? Well, the thing is, it broke down. Yeah. After only 2.5 years of ownership of that vehicle, it broke down. But it wasn't as simple as just an engine failure that was fixable. No, this is something that would have permanently put the engine out of commission, as it's irreparable. It's a thing called a snapped timing chain. Now, a timing chain is a critical component that, if severed, leaves the engine completely useless. It means that I would have had to spend thousands of dollars on a fresh new V6 engine or an inline engine to replace the old one that was destroyed from a simple timing chain snappage. So, it was either that or send the vehicle to the scrapyard, which, unfortunately, this was something that my insurance company wouldn't be able to cover. Since it was considered a natural breakdown in the engine bay from the vehicle's engine, they wouldn't be able to cover any of the losses associated. The value of the vehicle that was currently in hand, especially with the current CarMax, it was still well over 10 grand worth of by the time it broke down, but in the end, I was only given $3,300. Yeah, I was only mailed a check of $3,300 from the towing company as well as the Caledonia Automotive Auctioning Facility. This is a giant lot in which that hundreds of cars that were broken down, destroyed, or otherwise were all towed to by various owners of those cars for auctioning or selling them off to the highest bidder. The Caledonia Automotive Auctioning Facility would unfortunately have my Nissan Juke for some time, but unfortunately I have no current knowledge of the whereabouts of that vehicle or even who owns it at this time. So basically speaking, because of that issue, I was only given a fraction of what the vehicle's worth could have been had I sold it before it broke down, and I just had to cut my losses and ditch the kids, as Mike Myers once said. But that wasn't to say that I wasn't going to get a hold of a new vehicle. But a lot of trial and error had to come around, and because it was considered peak season in my jobs, I had no choice but to spend a lot more of my time working and a lot more of my hours fixated on what was at hand with my jobs, rather than continuing my search for a new vehicle. I instead just got a hold of a temporary vehicle, a loaner if you will, from a Russ Darrow just outside of Waukesha. And while that itself was just temporary, I can at least agree that having it for the time of 2 months, no joke. It was all the time that I had with it, but I'm not kidding when I say that going back to Jeep was probably the best that I could have done anyways. It might have been a car that I could have gotten my hands on with the money I had, but I instead just chose to wait and let my savings build up a bit more until I would eventually settle my hands on something else. A vehicle that I still own after about a year and a half. So, while I can say that that problem itself has been fixed since then, the amount of time I had to spend searching and scouring on Car Gurus, Kelley Blue Book, CarMax, and everything else I've searched for, a lot of test driving of certain cars and a lot of other shenanigans that went on, it's just outrageous. I would say that since it was the holidays, I can't exactly put much blame on those guys since they probably were doing what they were doing at the time, but again, 2 months is kind of a while just to wait on having myself another vehicle in hand, when I probably could have just spent my savings on a crappy beater, which is just the term used for a car that's pretty old, has a lot of miles on it, and probably it has at least one piece of accidental history written on its records. But I just simply chose to get a vehicle that had no accidents, low miles, and a good amount of other specifications. So, because those were the recommendations that my accountant had put together for me, especially in a handwritten note he handed to me. And I took a lot of time and patiently waited for something to turn up. Well, especially during that time that came around, there of course was a lot of snow, there was a lot of Christmas and holiday cheer. There of course was Christmas itself, which thankfully turned out to be a good way to compensate for a lot of things that went down. Losing a lot of money because of that one breakdown my old car had, believe it or not, gave way for a massive check to be written to me. No joke. I ended up getting a lot of money for Christmas of 2024. And that's something I will always be grateful for, especially when you consider the fact that I've had a lot to deal with financially throughout the year of 2024. And because of a lot of other things that happened throughout the year itself, apart from the medical bills that I have with my thyroiditis, as well as the bills associated with all the stuff I needed to cure it, from the coriander seeds to the walnut oil, as well as everything else, There, of course, was my video that I made about 2024 as an entirety. Unfortunately, because of the thyroiditis, because of the loss of my car, because of the politics that were going on, like usual, and because of other things that happened in 2024, including Hurricane Debbie in Orlando, well, I unfortunately had to not give a great score to 2024. It unfortunately falls into the years that are on the lower end of the spectrum throughout the decade. As I mentioned before, with the likes of 2020, 2021, and 2024, those would be considered the lower ends of the rankings. But for all the other years, they are indeed the higher ranking years of the 2020s. And because we're now in 2026, I can't exactly say what is good or what is bad about it, but at the end of the day, it's just what it is. It's a year that's somewhat uneventful until we eventually get to a point in which that events start to truly unfold. So, that is pretty much it. I've talked about 2024 in its entirety, starting from January and working my way to December of that year. So, thank you very much for sticking around here. I, of course, still have one more year worth talking about in the Vlog-A-Thon, 2025. A much bigger improvement to 2024 with lots of other things worth talking about just as well. So, if you want to see more go down to my channel, then Boone Scenic Valley Railroad. Yeah, another thing I should have mentioned, but make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay out of the Hollywood side for more content on the Vlog-A-Thon and elsewhere on this channel.